In my last video, I built the rolling frame and solid top for my new workbench. With no more room in the shop, I pushed the old bench out into the yard and my 3-year-old helped me tear it apart. I pulled out screws and he gathered them up and put them in a bucket. In this video I'm going to take you through my process of building and installing the panels that will double as flat workbench space on one side and dual flip-up tool stations on the other side. This was a really fun feature to design and build and the results are fantastic. This is shaping up to be a really useful addition to the shop. Let's see how it's done. I started out by breaking down a sheet of 3/4 inch plywood according to my plans. Figuring out the best way to utilize the material is much easier to do in the computer than it is with a tape measure and a pencil. I used my old circular saw with a fancy custom straight edge to make short work of this. I believe Nick Ferry calls this a door board. It's the next best thing to having a track saw. With the pieces more manageable, I use the table saw to cut them to their final dimensions. So for this next part I need to figure out exactly how wide the two panels on either side of the axle are going to be. Knowing that the axle is going to be in the exact center and that this is 23 3/4 of an inch, that makes exact center of the board 11 7/8. And I can guess and check and make sure that I'm doing this right by drawing out or laying out the axle and measuring on both sides and just see if it comes up the same number. Or, because the math on this works out so easy, the total width of this board is 23 3/4 and the diameter of the axle is 3/4. So we can throw away the 3/4 and we just have to divide what's left by 2. So we get 11.5 is the width of the boards that I need on either side of the axle. So if when I glue this together I put an 11.5 inch board here flush with the far side and here flush with this side, that will leave exactly 3/4 of an inch in the middle, and this is 3/4 inch plywood, so I'll have a perfect 3/4 inch square where my round axle is going to run through. Next, it's just a matter of carefully gluing and clamping the boards together. I don't have any clamps capable of reaching the center of this panel, so the weight of my planer will have to do. I did this glue up in 2 steps because I wanted to make extra sure that the space for the axle came out perfectly. In the first step, I had trouble with the sheet sliding around on the glue, so I tried the old salt trick to try to prevent that for the second go around. So at this point I've got the pivoting platforms all glued together and ready to go, and now I just need to figure out where to drill the holes for the axle. To do that, I've got a couple of clamps in place to hold up the one side, and then I've got this straight edge that I'm going to clamp the board to on this side to get it absolutely flush with the tabletop that I already have in place. So then I have a square version of the axle that's the exact dimensions as the slot on the inside of my pivoting platform, and I put a dowel center finder in the center of this. So I'm going to end up putting this in the recess in the pivoting platform, and then I'm going to put this in place and clamp it all up and make sure it's just right. And in the gaps that I have on either side, I allotted for about 1/8 of an inch all the way around this. I'm actually going to drive a wedge down in between the platform and the table or the frame, and that will drive this forward just enough to put a dimple in the wood on each side so I know exactly where to start drilling my holes. I put the panel in place, then used a straight edge to make sure that it was flush with the top and the face of the fixed part of the work surface. I used this method to mark out the locations for all 4 axle holes. In building the frame, I opted not to glue the back section together just in case I needed to disassemble it for this part of the build. It really came in handy to be able to take the back brace off and drill the axle holes in it at the drill press. This allowed me to make sure that the initial holes the axle had to pass through were perfectly straight, making the alignment of all of the parts much easier. While I had this part at the drill press, I also drilled the pilot holes for the locking pins. I'll explain these more later. Then I drilled the axle holes into the side of my solid bench top by hand. It wasn't as crucial for these to be straight because they just had to capture the end of the axle. Well, this is kind of the moment of truth. I went through all that effort to make sure that the axle hole lined up through everything perfectly, and now we just have to shove it through and see if it goes. Well, we just hit the back wall, I think. Yep, not going anywhere. I'm gonna clamp this on here just as a gauge, so I know if it starts backing out or not. But let's see what happens. It's almost free. There. It's just hanging out by the axle at the moment. Oh, it did not go all the way through. Should have taken a measurement. There it goes. I knew that was too easy. There. Piece of cake. Looks like we're a little bit out of square. So when I lined this up to put the axle in it, I made sure that the best side was up and all of the gaps were just exactly right. So the thinking was, if it's not perfect, the unperfect side is actually going to have the tools mounted to it. That way it won't matter, because I'm not using it as a bench when I have a tool facing up. I'm using it as a tool. And then when I need to go back to the bench, then you just flip it back around and the top side is back to flush and perfect again. So this will work out just fine. With the panels in place, I could mark and then trim my axles to length. Then when putting the axles back in place, I used some 1/8" thick nylon spacers to make sure everything stayed spaced correctly, which would in turn keep the panel spinning freely. Got one. With one side sorted out, I make quick work of installing the other. Then I make sure to test them thoroughly. Now, using the pilot holes I made at the drill press, I'm using an exceedingly long drill bit to make holes in the side of the flipping panel. This is where I will put the pins that will act as the locking mechanism to keep the panel locked in place. Well, it's more or less finished up. Got the solid top done, good, like it. Got the two flip tops working really well. I've got them temporarily locked with these pins. I think I'm going to keep the pins, but I'm going to end up building a handle to make it easier to just pull it in and out. The next step is to do what the whole reason it was designed for and attach my planer to it and make sure that it works with that much weight on it. So, gotta grab this monster and bolt him down. I've already got this thing flipped to my tool side, so I just have to center it up and bolt it down. Rather than trying to get the pins symmetrical from side to side so that I only had one hole and could just pull a pin and pop it right back in the same hole, lining that up was going to be too tricky, so I have two holes for each corner. One pin is for the top side and the other pin hole is for the tool side, so that way I didn't have to try to line up holes perfectly for when it swaps end for end and maybe didn't have the alignment right. So this is just a much simpler way to solve that riddle. I get the weight of the planer centered over the axle and positioned where I want it to be front to back, then use a pencil to mark out the mounting holes. I drill pilot holes in the panel, being careful not to drill all the way through. Then after putting the planer back in its position, I drive lag bolts most of the way into the holes. I come back with a wrench to finish tightening them by hand to avoid stripping out the plywood. Well, I've been using my new workbench for about a week now, and I am just tickled to death with it. It is solid as a rock. It's just as flat as I could want, and it rolls around easily when you want it to, and is rock solid when you don't want it to. The flipping feature to get the tools in and out just works slick. It's very easy to use. Just pull those pins. Just pull the pins on the ends here. I found that you only need one of them when you're really using it because you're not putting that much of a load on it. Pull a pin, let it flip down, shove the pin back in, and when you're going to use it as a workbench, I use both pins just so that it stays square with the world. And just that fast, back to a workbench. Very, very happy with how this thing has worked out. I'm going to do a few more things, so we're going to do one more part on this, and it's going to be installing a bench vise on the end here and building a handle for it, which is a little bit different, but it's going to be kind of fun. And then the pins are just bolts right now, and they're not really easy to get in and out, and it's kind of annoying to have to use pliers, so I'm going to make handles for these pins too to make that a little bit easier. But other than that, this is pretty much finished up. I do want to coat it with something, and I haven't really decided what yet. I'm looking for recommendations if anybody thinks they know what I should put as a coat on this to try to protect it a little bit more. I'm all ears. I was just thinking like a water-based poly, but if there's a better answer, let me know. Other than that, I guess thanks for watching, and you can check out next week if you want to see the finishing touches to this thing. And then further on down the road, I'm going to make cabinets that go underneath it. I've already got the plans, I just don't have the time right now. So anyway, thanks for watching, and give me a subscribe if this is your first time here, and hit like if you thought this was a good one for you, and we'll see you next time.